Britons a grilling.
Brain of Britain 2006. A nationwide general knowledge contest for the title Brain of Britain 2006. The chairman is Robert Robinson.
Hello. Another intellectual tussle with four contenders from the north of England. They are Mrs. Janet Hall, an air traffic controller now retired from Richmond, North Yorkshire. John Wrigley, a teacher also now retired from Stockport. David Sutherland, a community psychiatric nurse from Gateshead. And Pat Gibson, a computer software developer from Wigan. The rules do not change. 5 right in a row get you a 6th mark, and there are 10 seconds for lightning to strike. Here is the first question for Mrs. Hall. Which Southeast Asian city is nicknamed the Lion City?
Singapore.
It is. Who was the youngest of the Bronte sisters?
Anne.
Yes. What name is given to those parts of the Earth and its atmosphere able to support life?
The biosphere?
Yes. Who wrote the attack on unfettered capitalism called The Condition of the Working Classes in England in 1844? Time. Mr. Gibson?
Engels.
Engels is quite right. Mr. Wrigley, it's your turn. Who, in a conference this year, bemoaned his status as the world's richest man, saying that no good comes of it?
Bill Gates.
Yes, it's you again. In relief sculpture, bas-relief figures project only slightly from their background, and alto relievo stand out much more. Which Italian term is generally used to describe those in between the extremes, with about half their volume projecting from the surface?
Mezzo relievo.
Yeah, well thought out, sir, well thought out. Currently 7 Latin American countries have currencies with the same name, although the names of the subsidiary units vary a little. Which currency is that?
Peseta.
No. Mr. Gibson?
Peso.
The peso is quite right. Your turn, Mr. Sutherland. Which disease attacking trees of a particular genus is spread by beetles beneath the bark?
Duchenne disease.
Yes. Korfball, spelt with a K, is a basketball-like sport originating in the Netherlands. Korf means basket, apparently, where it still has its strongest following. Only the Dutch and on one occasion the Belgians have won the World Championship. What is the unique feature of the teams that play the game? You can't think of something that might be unique. Mr. Gibson?
Of mixed gender, mixed sex.
Mixed sex, absolutely right. Well done. And it's your turn, Mr. Gibson. Which famous police force traces its origin to a force founded by Sir John A. Macdonald in 1873 to establish law and order on the frontier?
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yes, you're absolutely right. The basis of the science of crystallography, used in examining atomic structure, is a law concerning the effects of crystals on X-rays formulated by and named after a father and son whose work in the field led to the joint award of a Nobel Prize in 1915. What was their name?
Bragg.
Yes, William Henry and William Lawrence Bragg. The McMahon Line is an international boundary still disputed, drawn up at the Simla Conference of 1914. It was intended to clarify one of India's borders, but was never ratified by one of the 3 parties to the conference. Britain was one of the 3 parties. Can you name one of the others?
China.
Yes, who would not ratify, and Tibet was the other one. Which prestigious British dance institution is celebrating its 75th anniversary this year, although under its current title it is the 50th anniversary?
The Royal Ballet.
Yes, you're right. In which town, Mr. Gibson, is the National Library of Wales situated?
Aberystwyth.
It is. And that is 5 in a row and the extra mark. makes its way at the end of our opening round. And the opening scores: 1 to Mr. Sutherland, 2 to Mr. Wrigley, 3 to Mrs. Hall, 9 to Mr. Gibson. Mrs. Hall, which of the chief gods of ancient Mexico had a name often translated into English as the feathered serpent? Time's ticking on. Out of time. Mr. Sutherland?
Quetzalcoatl.
Yes, you're right. Your turn, Mr. Wrigley. Which bird did the poet Shelley address as blithe spirit?
Nightingale.
No. Mr. Sutherland?
The lark.
No. Oh, excuse me for getting overexcited yet again. Yes, I stuttered, and I was roundly rebuked for so stuttering by Jorkins here. No is his answer. No. Mr. Gibson?
The skylark.
The skylark is what we wanted. And I think for once Jorkins is absolutely, well, no, he's always right, isn't he? But, I mean, he was certainly right because it's so well known as a poem, Ode to the Skylark, that that's the word we actually wanted. Mr. Sutherland, which social benefit in the UK is abbreviated as JSA?
Job Seekers Allowance.
It is. The 6 Bastable children and their schemes to alleviate their families' financial difficulties are the subject of the story of the Treasure Seekers and a number of other stories of the Edwardian period. Who wrote them? Ticking on. Out of time, Mr. Wrigley.
E. Nesbit.
E. Nesbit is quite right. Mr. Gibson, your turn. From which royal mistress does the Dukedom of St. Albans descend?
Nell Gwyn.
Yes. The people of the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean won a High Court decision in London this year regarding their right to return home. They were evicted by the British government at the beginning of the 1970s to facilitate the construction of an American air base on the largest island. What is that island called?
Diego Garcia.
It is. What is the flavour of the liqueur amaretto?
Almond.
It is. What nationality was the astronomer and deviser of a temperature scale, Anders Celsius?
Swedish.
He was. A few years ago, Tamashek was made an official language, co-equal with Arabic in Algeria. It is a generic term for the languages of the indigenous peoples who form a significant segment of the population of Algeria and of Morocco. What name, itself generic, is used for these groups?
Tuareg.
No. Mrs. Hall?
Berbers.
Berbers is right, well done. And at the end of that round, 3 to Mr. Sutherland, 3 to Mr. Wrigley, 4 to Mrs. Hall, 14 to Mr. Gibson. Mrs. Hall, what is the significance of cathedrals, such as those of the Church of England in Valletta and Brussels, being described as pro-cathedrals?
They have an archbishop rather than just a bishop.
No. Mr. Gibson?
The official formal cathedral has yet to be built. They're serving as cathedrals in its absence.
Yes, that is right. They're acting or temporary cathedrals. Pro in the sense of before, and you got that quite right. It's your turn, Mr. Wrigley. We now hear part of the opening track of probably the best-selling jazz album in the history of the genre, and one of the most influential, dating from 1959, and by one of the foremost figures in modern jazz. He was involved with most developments from the 1940s on and worked with nearly all of his leading contemporaries, although latterly alienating some aficionados by his crossover work with rock and later pop elements. What was his name? And the name?
Well, it's one of two.
Toss a coin then?
Yeah. Wynton Marsalis.
No.
The other one.
Mr. Gibson.
Miles Davis.
Miles Davis is right. That was the alternative. Was that your alternative, Mr. Wrigley?
That was my alternative.
Wow. Bad luck, bad luck. Miles Davis is the answer. The track is called So What and is from the album Kind of Blue. Now, Mr. Sutherland, architraves, rails, stiles and muntins are all familiar component parts of many examples of which everyday architectural feature?
Roofs.
No. Mr. Gibson.
Doors.
Doors is quite right. And it's your go again, Mr. Gibson. How did King Henry II of France meet his death in 1559?
Was he assassinated by a religious fanatic?
No. He was fatally injured in a jousting accident. That's what it was. And now we'll have to see how the scores have changed. We have 3 for Mr. Sutherland, 3 for Mr. Wrigley, 4 for Mrs. Hall, 17 for Mr. Gibson. Mrs. Hall, which play by Aeschylus has been said to be the oldest in the Western theatrical tradition, dating from around 472 BC, a few years after its setting, the aftermath of the Battle of Salamis, and is also the only surviving ancient Greek tragedy dealing with historical events?
The Wasps?
No. Mr. Gibson?
Lysistrata?
No.
The Oresteia.
No. Don't be left out, Mr. Saul. You're shaking your head. Well, I'll have to take your head shakers, what it should mean, and tell you that the answer is the Persians. And it's your turn, Mr. Wrigley. A bronze statue of 3-time Cheltenham Gold Cup winner Best Mate was unveiled at the racecourse this year, the 4th horse to be so commemorated there. One of the others is Dawn Run. Can you name one of the remaining 2?
Arkle.
Arkle's right. And I bet you can name the other one as well.
No.
Oh, you won't chance it. Golden Miller is the answer. It's your turn again. Many bodily functions such as heartbeat and digestion are controlled by the ANS. NS is nervous system. What word is represented by the A?
Automatic.
No. Mr. Sutherland?
Autonomic.
Autonomic is right. Well done. Well done indeed. Mr. Sutherland, your turn. Mount Silly at just over 6,000 feet is the highest point of a Pacific island nation which comprises 2 main islands. The mountain is on the westernmost and larger of these, called Savaii, whilst the national capital is on the other, Upolu. Which country is it?
Samoa.
It is. Which international charitable movement, dating from 1917 with mainly business and professional members, claims to be the largest service club organisation in the world and is especially noted for its work for the blind and for youth causes?
Talk H.
No. Mr. Gibson?
The Lions?
The Lions is right. Now, Mr. Gibson, in which country were the early 20th century avant-garde art movements, the Jack of Diamonds and the Donkey's Tail, which seceded from it, important groups?
Germany?
No. All you have to do is pick a country, I suppose. Mr. Wrigley?
Japan.
No. Mr. Sutherland?
France.
No. Now, Mrs. Hall?
Netherlands?
No. Russia is the answer. And let's see how things have changed. The scores are now 4 to Mrs. Hall, 4 to Mr. Wrigley, 5 to Mr. Sutherland, 18 to Mr. Gibson. Mrs. Hall, a British ex-teacher called Dee Caffari, became this year the first woman to achieve which specific nautical feat?
Single-handed round the world in the wrong direction.
Yes, that's right. Well done. Your turn again. Carpetbagger was a term of opprobrium for northerners who headed into the American South in the Reconstruction period following the Civil War to make their fortunes. What name was applied in the region to their local, that is, southern, collaborators?
Don't know.
Mr. Sutherland?
Scallywags.
Scallywags is the answer. Well done. Mr. Wrigley, the invention of which apparatus to project pictures, which became a very popular form of entertainment, particularly in the 19th century, and is seen as one of the precursors of modern cinema, is sometimes attributed to the 17th century Jesuit scholar and polymath Athanasius Kircher, although this is disputed.
I was going to say epidiascope, but I don't think that's a moving picture.
No?
Epidiascope, no?
Anyone else have a go? Mr. Sutherland?
Magic lantern.
Magic lantern, quite right. Mr. Sutherland, a small asteroid some 3.5 miles across, one of several so-called near-Earth asteroids, was discovered 20 years ago and named after the first known Celtic tribe in the British Isles. It's sometimes referred to, inaccurately, as Earth's second moon. What is it called?
Firbolg.
No. Mr. Gibson?
Truthna.
I've got it down. Well, yes, you've got the spelling right. I could hear it on your tongue. I got it down here as pronounced as Cruithne. But you got it right, absolutely. Cruithne. It's your turn again. Which American poet wrote in The Arrow and the Song the lines, "I shot an arrow into the air, it fell to earth, I know not where." I knew not where, I think, which seems rather irresponsible, as Jorkins merrily says here.
Longfellow?
Longfellow, yes, well done. Do you ever read him?
I'm afraid not.
No, I thought not. I mean, I doubted it. Does anyone? Someone said that he is to poetry what the barrel organ is to music. Although Edgar Allan Poe said he wrote brilliant poems by accident. You again, sir. The members of the G8 group of nations act as the host for summit meetings in annual rotation. When, then, is the UK next due to host?
2010.
No. Mr. Wrigley?
2013.
Is quite right. Well done, sir. And we'll see how the scores now are. We have 5 for Mrs. Hall, 5 for Mr. Wrigley, 7 for Mr. Sutherland, 20 for Mr. Gibson. Mrs. Hall, the trickster god Anansi, stories about whom originated in West Africa, but which are widespread, especially in the Caribbean area, is sometimes portrayed as human and sometimes as a particular creature, or something between the two. Which creature?
A spider.
Quite right. This year saw the 100th anniversary of the opening of a famous European rail tunnel. Which tunnel was that?
San Gotthard.
No. Mr. Gibson?
Simplon?
Simplon. Quite right. Mr. Wrigley? An American federal education reform dating from 2001 and the source of some contention between state and federal government is abbreviated as NCLB. For what do these initials stand? NCLB. Out of time. No one seems to be coming forward. NCLB, I must tell you then, no child left behind. Yes. Mr. Sutherland, over the past few years, a team led by French marine archaeologist Frank Godillot has recovered many artifacts covering several centuries from the seabed near to an ancient city. And these have been on display for the first time this year in a major exhibition in Berlin. Which ancient city is it?
Marseille.
No. Mr. Gibson?
Alexandria.
Alexandria is right. Now, Mr. Gibson, both sons of the Duke of Kent have renounced their right of succession to the throne, the elder through marriage to a Roman Catholic, and the younger through conversion to Roman Catholicism. Can you name either one of them? Out of time. Mr. Wrigley?
The Earl of St Andrews.
Quite right. Do you know the other one?
No.
Lord Nicholas Windsor is the answer to that. And now the scores. They're these: 6 to Mr. Wrigley, 6 to Mrs. Hall, 7 to Mr. Sutherland, 22 to Mr. Gibson. Now, Mrs. Hall, this year is the 150th anniversary of the death of the composer Robert Schumann, and we now hear an excerpt of one of his best-known vocal works. Until 1840, the year of his marriage to Clara Wieck, he composed almost exclusively for the piano, but in that year, his year of song, he produced a great number of songs, most of them in a number of cycles, including this one, based on poems by Heinrich Heine, about a lovelorn poet. What is the work called?
Ich will meine Seele taufen in den Kelch der Lilie hinein. Die Lilie soll fliegen, tauchen, ein Lied von der Liebsten mein. Das Lied soll Schauer bewegen, wie der Kuss von ihrem Mund, den sie mir einst gegeben, in wunderbar süßer Stund.
Dichterlieder.
Well done, ma'am. Yes, it was Poet's Love. It was sung there by Eberhard Wächter, accompanied by Alfred Brendel. Ganache, used as a filling or topping for cakes and biscuits, has 2 main ingredients. Can you name one of them?
Chocolate.
Yes, or cream. What else could it be, really? But there. The first boxer ever to regain the world heavyweight title, losing it in 1959 to Ingemar Johansson and winning it back from him the following year, died this year. What was his name?
Floyd Patterson.
It was. One of Sir Alan Ayckbourn's most successful plays concerns 3 couples with changing fortunes meeting on 3 successive Christmas Eves. What is the play called? Out of time, Mr. Wrigley.
Absurd person singular.
Quite right, sir, and it's your turn. Russia is by far the largest, but which is the second largest of the former constituent republics of the Soviet Union?
Kazakhstan.
Yes. From 1795, the Speenham Land system, devised by magistrates at Speenham Land in Berkshire, began to be adopted by other local authorities as well, particularly in southern England, and lasted until the 1830s. With what was the system concerned?
Payment of local taxes.
No, Mr. Sutherland.
Relief of the poor.
That's right, the poor law, poor relief, relief of the poor, as you rightly say. It's your turn. A major painter of the Italian Renaissance, a master of perspective and geometry, and an important figure in the intellectual world of the 15th century, whose baptism of Christ can be seen in the National Gallery in London, died on the same day, 12th of October, 1492, that Columbus's ships sighted the New World. What was his name? No. Mr. Gibson?
Raphael?
No. Mr. Wrigley?
Rubens.
No. Pick one, Mrs. Hall.
Fra Angelica.
No. Piero della Francesca is the answer. Your turn, Mr. Gibson. Our Common Interest, published in March 2005, was the well-received report of a commission established by Tony Blair the year before and comprising 17 members, including himself, Gordon Brown and Bob Geldof. What was the Commission's subject?
Aid to third world indebted countries.
No. Mrs. Hall?
Africa.
Africa. Big subject, but that was it. Well done. And now at the end of that round, let's see what the scores look like. We have 8 for Mr. Wrigley, 8 for Mr. Sutherland, 10 for Mrs. Hall, 22 for Mr. Gibson. And with Mrs. Hall, we begin our final round. As which somewhat belligerent and self-opinionated character has the comedian Al Murray developed a considerable following in Britain in recent years?
No idea.
Oh dear. Mr. Gibson?
The pub landlord.
You're quite right, sir. Mr. Wrigley, of which family of overwhelmingly marine fish is the burbot, the only one which occurs in fresh water in Europe, although now extinct in Great Britain?
No idea.
Oh, I won't let you off. Just guess.
Cod.
You see, I told him to do it. Quite right. Never waste an opportunity, Mr. Wrigley. Never be shamefaced about it. What, in a line of poetry, is a caesura?
Oh, it's the halfway mark.
No. Mr. Gibson?
It's a break, a pause in the middle.
It's a pause, exactly so. Mr. Sutherland? Why was the British general election of 1900 nicknamed the khaki election?
Because it was during the Boer War. It's only, we don't know a wave of patriotism.
You're quite right. The remains of the great Assyrian city of Nineveh lie near which major modern-day city of northern Iraq, a centre for the oil industry?
Mosul.
Yes. In the 1950s and 60s, the name of a fashionable jet-set location became attached to a style of trousers for women, ending short of the ankle, and the name stuck. They become very fashionable again in recent years after a couple of decades in the doldrums. What are they called? No? Out of time. Mrs. Hall?
Capris.
Capris is right.
You don't get the London cookies.
Now, Mr. Gibson, which publishing imprint was founded in the early 1970s by Carmen Khalil to specialise in women's literature?
Virago.
Is quite right. Many areas of the lunar surface have the designation mare, or sea, of tranquility, serenity, etc. What is the English equivalent for those areas called in Latin sinus, such as the sinus iridum or sinus aestuum, referring to rainbows and heat, respectively?
Are they dark patches?
No. Mr. Sutherland?
Bay.
Bay is quite right. Well done, sir. Right on the finishing line. And now I can give you the final scores on this occasion. They're these: 9 to Mr. Wrigley, 11 to Mrs. Hall, 11 to Mr. Sutherland, 25 to Mr. Gibson. So, by what one might reasonably call a country mile, Mr. Gibson showed them a clean pair of heels. He goes forward to the semi-finals. Next week we have 4 contestants. On that occasion they come from the west of England. Till then, I bid you goodbye.
The chairman of Brain of Britain was Robert Robinson, and the questions were set by Kevin Ashman. The programme was devised by John P. Wynne and produced by Richard